नमस्कार, मैं हूं अनामिका सिंह। आज हम फिर से जुड़े हैं हमारे सेकेंड सेशन के लिए। दिस सेशन विल बी ऑन द टॉपिक प्रिंसिपल्स ऑफ लैंग्वेज टीचिंग। यह पर्टिकुलर टॉपिक हमारे सीटेट के पेपर 1 और पेपर 2 दोनों में ही हमारी मदद करेगा अच्छे से क्वेश्चंस को आंसर करने के लिए। So let us not waste any more time and get inside this particular session and try to learn what are the various principles of language teaching. In order to understand the various principles of language teaching, हमारे लिए बहुत ज़रूरी है कि हम पहले ये समझें कि लैंग्वेज क्या है, भाषा क्या है, उसका मतलब क्या है, उसके कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स क्या क्या हैं। So if I have to define language to all of you, I would say language is a medium through which one can express one's ideas, thoughts and feelings. हमारे पूरे विश्व में अनेक तरह की भाषाएं बोली जाती हैं। एक भाषा का दूसरी भाषा से एसोसिएशन कुछ हद तक हम देख सकते हैं, लेकिन ये सारी लैंग्वेजेस कैसे बनी थी, कैसे स्टार्ट हुई थी, ये हमारे लिए समझना थोड़ा मुश्किल है। लेकिन हमें ये पता चल गया है, लैंग्वेज इज अ सिस्टम. It is a system wherein we use various words together to form meaning and express our views and ideas. Edward Sapir has defined language as language is a purely human and non-instinctive method of communicating ideas, emotions, and desires by means of a system of voluntarily produced symbols. And also, we need to remember that these symbols will be arbitrary. जो हम शब्द यूज़ कर रहे हैं वो किस चीज़ के लिए यूज़ कर रहे हैं, इन दोनों में कोई रिलेशनशिप नहीं होता है। बट हम जब उसको उसके साथ एसोसिएट कर देते हैं और सब लोग ने मान लिया कि इस चीज़ को यही कहा जाएगा, वहाँ से लैंग्वेज सिस्टम डेवलप होना शुरू हो जाता है। So coming to the characteristics of language, language has various characteristics. The first one being social and growth oriented. So talking और communicating, जिसके लिए हमें भाषा की बहुत ज़रूरत है, वह एक social act है। हमें इसके लिए दूसरों का होना भी हमारे लिए बहुत ज़रूरी है. It will help us to adjust in the society and also to interact with everyone. ये जो भाषा है इसकी वजह से ही हमारा जो कल्चर है वो नरिश होता है और हम एक दूसरे से रिलेशनशिप्स बनाए रखते हैं और उन्हें स्ट्रॉन्ग भी बनाते हैं। इन लैंग्वेज इसमें कई सारे सिंबल्स हम एक साथ यूज कर कर उसे एक लैंग्वेज का रूप देते हैं। A language consists of various symbols. Symbols can be sounds, gestures, or even written signs. These are used to denote certain objects and also give a particular meaning in a particular context. Another characteristic of language would be that it is systematic. These words, which are arbitrary in nature and are having a particular value in a particular system, these are always arranged in a particular order. There are certain phonological and also grammatical systems which are to be followed for a particular sentence to give out meaning. That is why it is considered to be a systematic approach. The next one is arbitrary. The language itself is arbitrary in nature. There is no inherent relationship between a word and its meaning. For example, in English we say woman. In Urdu we would say औरत, in Hindi we say महिला. But ये तीनों भाषाओं में a particular word for a same meaning हमने कैसे चूज किया, किस बेसिस पे डिसाइड किया, इसका कोई रीज़न नहीं है. इसे हम आर्बिट्री कहते हैं. इसीलिए लैंग्वेज को an arbitrary system of symbol कहा जाता है, which is organized in a systematic manner to give out a particular meaning. Another characteristic of language would be evolutionary and conventional in nature. So लैंग्वेजेस जैसे हम आज जानते हैं सेम वैसे ही पहले नहीं थे. वक्त के साथ लैंग्वेजेस में नए शब्द और नए नए रूल्स ऐड होते गए जैसे हमें ज़रूरत पड़ रही थी उसके हिसाब से, एंड इट वाज पास्ड फ्रॉम वन जनरेशन टू अनदर. So basically a language changes, it grows, it expands, and sometimes some of the languages they become extinct. जब उनके यूजर्स नहीं रहते हैं और कोई ट्रेडिशन ही नहीं बचा है उसे पास ऑन करने के लिए, तो ऐसे ऐसे कई लैंग्वेजेस हैं जो एक्सटिंक्ट भी हो जाती हैं. टू गिव एन एग्जाम्पल ऑफ एवोल्यूशनरी nature of language, this word that we use very often, prepon and postpon. Postpon was a word which was already existing, but prepon we can see is a much recent word. This actually came into being because of us Indians. Postpon was already existing, so we started using prepon so much as something that happens before. Otherwise, it was not existing. The words that were used was rescheduling, maybe do it on a different day, can we do it prior to this, so those kinds of vocabulary was used, but we Indian brought in this prepon concept as well. So this is how, as and when we need it, we change the language, we add new words, and then slowly, as it is accepted in a wider society, it becomes acceptable. Another example that I would like to give you is, जैसे कि आपने देखा होगा आजकल के बच्चे कई सारे शॉर्ट फॉर्म्स और एब्रीविएशंस यूज करते हैं, जैसे कि TTYL, टॉक टू यू लेटर. ये सब हमने पहले कभी सोचा नहीं होगा, लेकिन आज के टाइम में हम ये सब यूज कर रहे हैं. MIL, मदर इन लॉ. MIA, विच इज मिसिंग इन एक्शन. जब हम किसी को नहीं ढूंढ पा रहे हैं या फिर हमने काफी टाइम से उन्हें नहीं देखा है, तो वी विल आस्क देम, you have been MIA, you have been missing in action. So all of these words or abbreviations have been brought in by the new generation based on the need that they have. This fast moving generation needed short forms for certain words, so they have developed these abbreviation. The last characteristic being creative and productive. So the structural elements of a language, it can be combined in many ways and we can produce them with new utterances as and when we are using the language and we see that we require to change it a little bit more so that it fits our context. That's how it gives us that opportunity. Language always gives us that opportunity to be a lot more creative. So this is what we understand by language, its meaning and certain characteristics. So the major takeaway for us here will be, language is a human, social, symbolic, systematic, arbitrary, evolutionary, creative and productive system which we use for communication with each other. Moving on to the next slide. Now we will look into aims of language teaching, the importance of language, importance of English language specifically. So basically when we talk about aims of language teaching, आखिर हम भाषा को क्यों सीखते हैं या फिर बच्चों को क्यों पढ़ाते हैं? तो बेसिकली भाषा की ज़रूरत हमें किस चीज़ के लिए है? ताकि हम दूसरों को समझ सके और जो हम कहना चाहते हैं वो दूसरे समझ सके. सो द एबिलिटी टू अंडरस्टैंड द स्पीकर्स लैंग्वेज, एबिलिटी टू रीड अलॉन्ग विद अंडरस्टैंडिंग. जब भी हम कोई टेक्स्ट को पढ़ रहे हैं हम उसे अच्छे से समझ भी पाएँ, इस चीज़ के लिए भी हमें लैंग्वेज की ज़रूरत है. ऑल्सो टू एक्सप्रेस आवर फीलिंग्स फ्लुएंटली एंड ऑल्सो डाइवर्सली to a larger group of people from varied backgrounds and varied languages. इसके लिए भी हमें लैंग्वेज सीखना बहुत ज़रूरी है. The next one would be ability to learn technological language used in teaching of other subjects. So there are certain specific words which are existing in certain disciplines. So when we try to learn language and use it in various subjects, it is important to learn the technical or technological language of that particular subject as well. The next one would be ability to understand the scientific aspect of a language. For us to actually understand scientific phenomena, various occurrences in our society, it is important that we do understand language that is being used in other subject areas, even science. The next aim of language teaching would be development of creative skills. The English language or languages in general, they give us so many instances, so much opportunity to be creative and use language in whatever ways as we can. That is why we have so much importance being given to creativity when it comes to language learning. The next aspect of aim of language teaching would be sensitivity. So language is also used as a means to transfer culture. It also means that we as a group of people who speak the same languages or even if we are speaking different languages, we understand the emotions of each other and we communicate with each other. This develops a bond of oneness. So as learners, it is very important for them to understand the sensitivity towards the national issues, the cultural heritage of our country, and also understand the different aspects of contemporary life. So these are some of the aims of language teaching. Coming to why language is important, language happens to be the primary source of communication. It is the method through which we share our ideas and thoughts with each other. Many experts say that human beings are separated from animals because we have this ability of using language and communicating much better than any other being was able to do till date. That is why it becomes important to learn languages. Language is also one of the most important means for acquiring human knowledge. For us to learn something new, for us to understand things, it is very important that we understand this language, because only through reading and then transmitting it to others, we will be able to transfer knowledge. So the human knowledge, it moves into three phases. The first one being preservation. So language is important so that we can preserve the present day's knowledge for our future generations to read. And then this whole process of giving the knowledge from this generation to the next generation is called as transmission. And after we read what is present here, it will help us to expand further, know more and more, read more and more, think using all of these languages and all these subject areas that we are being exposed to. This will lead to the advancement and also expansion of the knowledge system. Now, this we need to understand that importance of English language. In India, English language has been given a lot of importance in present times, and it is not just in India. Globally, English language is being used in many places. For example, the English language is having a lot of literature from various languages which they have translated and kept in English. And because of us having the access to these books and knowing the English language, it is helping us to expand our horizons of how much literature or how much information we are being exposed to. Another reason why English language is important is a lot of the internet facilities, a lot of the resources available, a lot of things that go on in the international scenario, they all have English language. So we cannot do away with this language, so we may as well use it to our advantage. According to University Grants Commission and also one of the initial policies of our country, English was said to be an important language, and they also highlighted that we need not cut ourselves off from English language. We can use it for developing, growing, and earning more and more knowledge by reading thoroughly into the various literature that is present in English languages. So all of these things make us understand that it is important to learn language. It is also equally important to learn English language. Language is considered as the best source of social and cultural development, and hence it becomes very important for us to learn language. Now we come to understand principles of language teaching. It is very important for us to understand that various psychologists and linguists have given certain principles of how we should teach language and how people actually learn language. So the first one being theory of motivation and interest. So this particular theory, like we also discussed in our last session, how motivated are we? How interested are we in learning a language will play a very important role in language learning. So it becomes a principle for teaching because it is important that we cater to the interest of our students. Only then they will be able to acquire whatever we are teaching or learn the language. Moving on to theory of imitation. This particular theory, it talks about imitating what is being said. So when we talk about language, as you would have noticed, जो छोटे बच्चे होते हैं वो स्टार्ट करते हैं बोलना वो चीज़ें जो वो ऑफन सुनते हैं। वो अपने आसपास, जैसे कि उनके पेरेंट्स का नाम कोई और ले रहा है तो वो बार बार उसको सुन सुनकर अपने पेरेंट्स को कभी कभी काफ़ी बच्चे नाम से बुलाना पहले शुरू करते हैं और फिर धीरे धीरे अम्मा, मम्मी या पापा, धीरे धीरे वो बदलता है। एंड बच्चों की आदत है हमारी नकल उतारने की, विच इज़ वॉट इज़ इमिटेशन। तो कई बार जब हम ना, नो, हर चीज़ के लिए वो कहते हैं बच्चों को, तो हम देखते हैं कि वो बच्चों के बिहेवियर में रिफ्लेक्ट करना शुरू हो जाता है। फिर हम बच्चों से जो भी कहेंगे वो हर चीज़ के लिए नो कहना शुरू कर देते हैं। तो दिस इज़ व्हाट इज़ बेसिकली द थियोरी ऑफ इमिटेशन। इट बिकम्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर द टीचर to give out certain principles or give certain activities which involve a lot of repetition, which will help the students to see what the teacher is doing and then imitate. We also have this concept of model reading. So the teacher does the model reading, the students will be listening, and then the proper stress, intonation, pronunciation, everything that the teacher has used is something that is expected for the students also to imitate. So this is the theory of imitation. Moving on to theory of habit formation. So this is slightly similar to what we also discussed in the morning. Theory of habit formation. Theory of habit formation is important because only when we are exposed to something again and again, when we are trying to use it in our daily life and it becomes a habit for us, that is when it is being instilled in our system, and we will have this corpus of vocabulary, language rules and grammatical rules. So we will use it as and when the context arises. That is why habit formation is important. The fourth one being theory of exercise, practice and drill. So continuously practicing a particular language, continuously speaking, continuously communicating, जैसे कि हम घर में उस भाषा में बात कर रहे हैं, हम स्कूल गए तो फिर से उस भाषा में बात कर रहे हैं, हमारे दोस्त हमसे उस भाषा में बात कर रहे हैं। तो जितना ज़्यादा हम प्रैक्टिस करेंगे, एंड इसका हमारे टीचर्स के लिए ये टेक अवे होना चाहिए कि हम बच्चों को मोर एंड मोर असाइनमेंट्स, मोर एंड मोर अपॉर्चुनिटीज़ और एक्टिविटीज़ दे जहाँ पर वो जो भी वो सीख रहे हैं उसे प्रैक्टिस कर सके. दैट इज़ द थियोरी ऑफ एक्सरसाइज. मूविंग ऑन टू थियोरी ऑफ इंडिविजुअल डिफरेंसेस, like we discussed in our last session, and you would also be looking into it in inclusive education part. There are so many individual differences among all the learners in our classroom and among all of us in general. तब जब हर बच्चे की पढ़ने की क्षमता, हर बच्चे की पढ़ने की स्पीड अलग अलग होती है, तो हमारे टीचर्स को वो लेसन्स भी उसी हिसाब से प्लान करने होंगे. दिस इज़ व्हाट इज़ थियोरी ऑफ इंडिविजुअल डिफरेंसेस. थियोरी ऑफ यूजिंग मदर टंग. हम कोई भी चीज़ जब अपनी मदर टंग में उसको सीखते हैं या सुनते हैं या उसको एसोसिएट करते हैं, तो वो हमारे लिए ज़्यादा आसान हो जाता है याद रखना. इसलिए वी शुड ऑलवेज गिव अ लॉट ऑफ इम्पॉर्टेंस टू यूजिंग ऑफ मदर टंग in our classrooms also, even when we are trying to teach them the second language other than their mother tongue. If we connect it to the mother tongue, the ability to grasp will enhance. The next principle, theory of exposure to the language. The more a child is being exposed to the language, the more they are interacting in that language, the easier it will become for them to use it in their language, and also they will get better and better each day. The next one being correlation with life. Anything and everything that we learn, as is also the view of all the constructivists, should always be related to our real life. We always build on what we already have. The knowledge that the child is already having, we should build on that. And that is why it is important that all the content, all the language examples that we are giving, we try to associate it with the child's life. The next principle is theory of oral approach. So basically all our LSRW skills, listening, speaking, reading and writing, ये चारों जो हमारे skills हैं ये बहुत ही ज़रूरी हैं for us to be proficient in a particular language. So when we talk about theory of oral approach, it talks about this whole hierarchy or this whole sequence in which we learn a language. So first we listen to a language, then we start speaking that language, then we start reading that language, and then finally we start writing that language. And that is why it is important that we start with the oral concepts, and the oral approach is basically that. Theory of selection and gradation. As the very word suggests here, the teachers should select and also grade the concepts and make them developmentally appropriate for our learners. Certain students at certain age can only do a certain number of tasks in a certain level. So, it is important for the teachers to plan the language learning in that manner. The language learning happens in a particular sequence. We first learn words individually, then we try to associate the word with a particular object, and then slowly we build on sentences, multiple sentences, paragraphs, and then we start having that fluency in languages. So basically, selection and gradation is one of the important principles that the teacher should keep in mind. The next one being theory of ratio and series. So what does the theory of ratio and series talk about? Like I spoke about LSRW skills. So this theory of ratio and series says that we should give equal importance while planning lessons to all of these skills. We should not just focus on making the children write a lot of the content. We should also expose them to various tasks which involve listening to the language, speaking activities, a lot of reading activities, and then the writing activities. There should be some amount of ratio that we are keeping for all of these activities, and these should happen in a series as and when we are doing learning in the classroom. The last principle here would be theory of child-centered learning. This becomes one of the important principles in our learning in general, and also when it comes to language teaching. The child has to always remain at the center of the teaching learning process, and as and when the teacher is teaching, they have to make sure that they are teaching keeping the child in mind. The developmental age appropriateness of the activities, the kind of words you are using, which mother tongue the child is coming from, and various other factors which we discussed in our last session. How the child is being affected by all of these aspects, we should see while we are planning our lessons. So these are basically the principles of language teaching. Moving on to the next part of our session, we have the maxims used while teaching. So basically, maxims are certain principles or certain steps that we should follow while teaching. So the first maxim that we have here is known to unknown. You all would have already heard of this. We all already practice most of it in our classrooms. So we should always start the class or start learning something new by knowing what we already know. It should always go from known to something that we don't know or something that is unknown to us. So, start teaching from what your students already know. Old knowledge, it lays the foundation for building new knowledge on it. So, if I have to teach certain grammatical concepts or figure of speech or parts of speech, certain aspects in my English classroom, I would start by teaching the first initial concept and then build from there on it. Like for example, as we have here, we want to teach nouns and pronouns. Only if I teach what are nouns, I can move on to what is pronoun, because noun is something that we can actually relate to students' known concepts that they already have in their mind already. As in, like noun is basically name of places, things, animal, person. So when we talk about these examples that they have and then move on to the next aspect, that is pronoun, it will be easier for the students to understand, and this is how the teaching should move. This is how we should plan our teaching in the classroom. The next principle or the maxim being simple to complex. We should first teach them simple things like the simpler vocabularies first, and then we move on to complex ones. There are certain words which are having multiple meanings in multiple contexts. We start it with using it in a particular context which is widely used, and then we give them exceptions of how the same word can be used in other places in different manner. So something that is simpler, something that is known, from there we move on to the complex concepts. For example, cat, cats, cat is sitting on the mat. So cat is singular, cats is plural, cat is sitting on the mat. This is a particular sentence that is used by this word or the noun cat. So we see that this is all moving for something very simple as the noun itself, then the plural form of it, and then how it can be used in a sentence. This is how we understand the simple to complex maxim of teaching. The third maxim here is concrete to abstract. So basically, concrete are all those things which are real, which we can understand, we can see, we know about them, and then abstract is something that we have to think about. We have to use our imagination a lot. So the real experiences, the concrete experiences will help us understand the abstract concepts better. So when we use language, we can use it to define or to talk about the concrete experiences we are having, and then the creativity in the languages will allow us to talk about it in the abstract nature as well. So for example, an apple, or if I say a red apple, so the child already knows it because they have seen it, they have experienced it, they have eaten it. And then when I say that there is a golden apple, so you receive a golden apple. So we have two association here. Golden, the color gold, it talks about something that is valuable. Then the fruit apple itself. So we can use this in our classroom in order to enhance the students' creativity and give them instances as in how and what they think, give them various opportunities, giving them open-ended question wherein they are given lot of freedom to write and use their creativity, use language in a manner that it will be very expressive and also abstract in nature. The next maxim is analysis to synthesis. So when we talk about this, we say that we should read something, we should analyze it, and then build something new based on what we have understood. So I get a piece of information, or I am reading a particular thing in languages and I have understood it, and then how I synthesize something new, how I make new sentences based on some of the words and their meanings that I have just understood, how I synthesize this later, is what this maxim is talking about. We should always move from analysis to synthesis. The next maxim here is induction to deduction. So the methods of teaching or methods of learning language here, induction method and the deduction method, these are two methods which you all will be already well versed with. The first one, it gives examples, it helps the learners reach the conclusion based on the examples. And when it comes to deduction, it is basically we give them rule first and then we ask them to give examples here. So this is also important when it comes to language teaching. The next one being psychological to logical. So this maxim, it talks about the interest of various learners, their abilities, and how they all have different levels of difficulty, different pace of learning. So we should develop the content, we should do the teaching in a logical manner so that how the learning actually happens psychologically is same to what we are exposing them in the classroom. The next maxim is relate form to meaning and contextualize. So we should connect the language with the meanings and then teach it in a particular context to our learner so that they are able to understand it better and know in what other context they can actually use it. For example, as you can see here, the context is a child asking, "Can I have some water?" The new vocabulary can be water here, and then me asking the child to write a few sentences using water in some other context where else water can be used. So we can ask them to write what is water conservation, what are the various uses of water. So when we are using something that we taught in a new context after they have understood the meaning of that particular word, this is what we talk about when it comes to maxims of teaching while we are dealing with English language and even other languages as such. Now, moving on to the next part, we have now understood what are the various principles of language learning, why is it important for us to learn language, and how there are various principles of teaching language, and what are the various maxims and how they should be used while we are teaching languages in our classrooms. Now we will move on to certain questions which have come in previous CTET examinations and try to see how our understanding of this concept is being transacted in the way that we deal with our questions and answers. तो हमारे सामने जो पहला सवाल है, which of the following is suitable for making students responsible for their own learning? So, as you see, these questions will have a mix of pedagogical as well as content knowledge that we have about learning language and also teaching of the language. So, the options that we have: using technology to chat and network, encouraging students to ask more and more questions, giving a lot of homework, project work, and assignments to improve language skills of students. Fourth option, discouraging students from making decisions about how they learn best. तो हमारे सामने ये चारों ऑप्शंस है. आई होप आपको समझ आ चुका है कौन सा इसमें से करेक्ट ऑप्शन है. सो टू मेक द चाइल्ड मोर एंड मोर रिस्पॉन्सिबल, वी शुड एड्रेस वॉट एवर क्वेरीज दे हैव. जो भी उनके डाउट्स हैं, मिसकंसेप्शंस हैं, उन सबको जब हम एड्रेस करेंगे तभी बच्चों को समझ में आएगा कि वो और कैसे इन्वॉल्व हो सकते हैं अपनी लर्निंग में. सो द राइट आंसर हियर वुड बी एनकरेजिंग स्टूडेंट्स टू आस्क मोर एंड मोर क्वेश्चंस. मूविंग ऑन टू द नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन. The constructivist approach to learning means. We discussed this particular topic in our previous session, and also in this particular session we have touched on it. So remember constructivist approach. What does it talk about? What are its key principles? And now let us look at all the options that are given here. Teaching rules of grammar and consolidating through rigorous practice. Helping learners acquire new vocabulary by studying literature intensively. Teaching new words and structures using a variety of audio-visual aids followed by practice through drill. Involving the students in a variety of activities to encourage them to learn new words and structures by accommodating them with those that they already have learnt through a process of discovery. So there are certain key words here in these options that are given. So constructivist approach basically keeps the child at the center, and it talks about how the child is not an empty slate. We build on what the existing knowledge the child is having. So which option is reflecting that? Option 4 is reflecting that. So the correct answer here would be option 4. Moving on to the next question. When learners are engaged in a pair activity, taking on roles of doctor and a patient, the activity is called declamation, simulation, exchanging notes, and real activity. Here we can easily remove certain option. Option A we can remove, option 3 we can remove. Now we are left with two options, simulation and real activity. As most of our teachers would have done simulated teaching, which is also called as micro teaching, macro teaching, which we practice. So basically what simulation means is trying to enact or simulate a particular scenario in your classroom. So as in our activity, that is the pair activity, there is the role of a doctor and patient. The children are simulating or getting into the role of someone. So the correct answer here would be very easy, simulation. Moving on to the next question. The next question being, gender stereotypes and bias among learners can be discouraged by. This particular question becomes important for us in language and also an important aspect when it comes to inclusive education. There are certain instances when in language learning we are using textbooks, reading textbooks, or even communicating in the class wherein certain amount of gender stereotype and bias is reflected in our language use. That's why this question also becomes important here. The options here are using textbooks which do not perpetuate such beliefs. Second option, creating an open and encouraging atmosphere in a mixed class. Third, pressuring girls to learn cooking. Fourth, enabling all learners to cook and sew irrespective of gender. So here there are certain options which are on the positive side whenever we talk about gender stereotype and bias, like the first option, using textbooks which do not perpetuate such beliefs. It is a good thing. We should not have textbooks which are encouraging or talking about these beliefs. Next, let us see, creating an open and encouraging atmosphere in a mixed classroom. Third option being, it is very specific. When we see the third and fourth option, it is talking about a specific gender role or a particular activity that is associated to a gender and is now being asked for the other gender also to be performed with. So what we will do is we will remove third option. We will also remove the fourth option. Now we are left with two options. But when we are talking about gender stereotypes and bias among learners can be discouraged by, it cannot just be done in the most active way with the first one. So the correct option here would be creating an open and encouraging atmosphere in a mixed class. Now moving on to the next question. When a teacher uses lessons in science and social science to teach language, such an approach can be termed as. So, the language is one such subject that we cannot do away with. Even when we are teaching different subject, whether you're teaching maths, whether you're teaching science, whether you're teaching social science, we all need language to basically communicate and also learn. So, this particular question also becomes an important thing here as to why languages is important. So let us look at the option: language across the curriculum, objective language teaching, pluralistic language teaching, discipline-wise language teaching. So when the languages are used across curriculum, the same language is being used in other subject areas. In order for us to understand them better, understand the jargons of that particular subject, we need the language. So the correct option here would be language across the curriculum. Move on to the next question. After reading a story on fish, if a teacher asks children to answer, imagine you are a fish in a pond. What do you see around you? This is an example of. So as you see, this is an application based question. We are giving you a scenario. So now this scenario is in front of us. We are in the class and we are giving this particular assignment or asking a student to talk about this after we have read a story on fish. So these are all the important things that you have to see when you read the question. Now let us move on to the options: multiple choice question, comprehension question, closed type question, and open-ended question. If you remember, we discussed the opportunities that language give us for creativity. That openness that is brought in languages is not actually available in many other subjects as such. Now, let us look at the options. Clearly, it cannot be a multiple choice question. It cannot be a comprehension based question because the teacher has read a story about fish, but he or she is not asking the question about that particular character in the story. This is an application of something else that they want to discuss. So this becomes an open-ended question. So the right answer here would be open-ended question. Moving on to the next question. A method is a body of dash that a teacher adopts in the teaching learning process. So we have a certain method that we will use when we are teaching. So this particular method, how is it developed? What does it consist of? So basically a method has various ways of doing things, various techniques that are available in a method that we will adopt while we are transacting a particular content or teaching. So the right answer here would be technique. The next question that we have in front of us is, a teacher reads out the text and explain it word for word in English. What method or approach does she adopt in her class? So now what are the keywords here that we need to focus on in the question is word for word. And then what are they asking? If I am explaining a particular text word for word, which approach am I using? So we have the options in front of us. The first option is communicative language teaching, task-based language teaching, the direct method, or a structural approach. So here, because I am reading the text and I am explaining it to you word by word, I am giving out the meaning. This is a direct method of teaching the language in the classroom. So the right answer here would be the direct approach. Moving on to the next question. Lata, an English language teacher of class 7th, divides the class into pairs to read a sequence of pictures and then describe it to each other. What is this activity pedagogically known as? So this particular question, it is about a collaborative activity that the students do together in the class. The key points that you have to pick while you read the question is that the class is divided into pairs and the children are doing something together in a pair. So what kind of activity will it be called? So the first one is teacher facilitated reading. Is it a reading activity? No. So we can remove this. The next one is peer interaction. So yes, two students are together in pair and they are interacting and doing something together. The next one is an assignment. The next one is a group work. So when you talk about pairs, we are talking about the students collaborating together and discussing things with their peers. So this is a partner work. So the answer here would be peer interaction. The next question is TBLT in second language teaching stands for, or what does this particular approach, or what is the full form of TBLT is what this question wants to know from us. This is a very simple question here. So the option in front of us are tool based language teaching, task book language teaching, task based language teaching, and task based language training. So one question that we have in front of us, this involves a abbreviation and its full form. So this is also another kind of question that comes in our CTET examination. So we can easily remove task-based language training because we are talking about teaching. Then as you can see, there is a specific option which is talking about task book language teaching. This also does not seem appropriate, so we will remove this. Now we are left with option 1 and option 3. In the teaching of second language, what we do is we give children a certain task. While the children are performing that task, through this whole process is how they will learn the language. This particular approach or this method of teaching is called task-based language teaching. And thus, the correct option here would be option 3. Moving on to the next question. Language is considered arbitrary because. This comes from the very first discussion that we had. So let us look at the options that we have in front of us. It follows grammatical rules. It changes over time. There is no inherent relationship between a word and its meaning. It is used only by humans. So if you see, all of these options are correct. Now it becomes very difficult for us to eliminate like that. So what we have to look for is which would be the most appropriate option here as based on the question that we have in front of us. So the word here that they're talking about or the particular characteristic of language that we are discussing is arbitrary. The language is an arbitrary system. So the word arbitrary, like we discussed, it means there is no inherent relationship between a word and its meaning. Hence, the correct answer here would be option 3. Which characteristic of language allows speakers to create completely new sentences? So as we discussed that language has a lot of characteristics and some of them allow us to write our own new words or use it in various contexts which were even not thought of earlier. So it allows us a lot of creativity and we can also produce languages in various levels, in various times, in various contexts. So the options that we have here are symbolic nature, creativity and productivity, arbitrary nature, and systematic structure. Arbitrary nature we just discussed. Coming to the systematic structure. So a language, it follows a certain rule, it follows a certain system of arranging these words in order for it to give out meaning. That is what is systematic structure, which is not what we are talking about here. Coming to symbolic nature. So language is considered as a collection of various symbols which come together, put in a systematic manner, give out a meaning. So this also is not appropriate based on the question that we have on hand. So the correct option here would be creativity and productivity. This is the correct answer because creativity and productivity, it allows for us to create completely new sentences based on the knowledge of language that we have with us. Moving on to the next question. A teacher demonstrates correct pronunciation and asks students to repeat after her. This reflects. So we saw that there are certain ways of teaching. In those principles of teaching, we have listed so many theories, so many linguists have given certain rules and also approaches to teaching. Let us see which option is more appropriate here. Theory of imitation, child-centered learning, theory of exposure, selection and gradation. So the question that we have on hand with us, it is talking about the teacher demonstrating correct pronunciation and asks the students to repeat after her. So like I told you about model reading, this is where it is finding its application. So the most appropriate option here for us would be theory of imitation, because the students are imitating what the teacher is doing, or the model reading that the teacher has done. The students are trying to use the same pronunciation, trying to do it the same way that the teacher has done it. Thus, the correct option here would be theory of imitation. Moving on to the next question. Teaching essential vocabulary before introducing difficult vocabulary reflects which particular principle of teaching language? So we have here 4 options with us. Let us try doing elimination method. First is oral approach, second motivation theory, third selection and gradation, fourth exposure theory. So the oral approach, it talks about how we should start with the oral practice of a language. Motivation theory, it talks about only if there is intrinsic or extrinsic motivation to learn a language, especially in case of a second language, the children will be able to pick up a language. The next one, selection and gradation. So we should select developmentally appropriate content and we should grade it as to how our children can learn in a particular order, in a graded manner. The last one, exposure theory. The more exposure the children are having to a particular language, the better they will be able to learn and use it in their everyday life. So the particular question that we have, it is talking about essential vocabulary, learning the essential vocabulary before we move on to the difficult level or a higher level. So clearly the correct answer here would be selection and gradation. The next question is, a teacher asks students to discuss their favorite festival, share personal experiences, and then write a paragraph about it. Which principles are best reflected here? So we have, the question itself is having 4 options. The first one is correlation with life, child-centered learning, the oral approach, and the fourth one, habit formation. So here, this is the complete question. As you can see, this is a different kind of question wherein there are certain particular principles mentioned and we need to now choose and tell which one is best reflected in the particular activity or in the particular context that they have presented in front of us. So when you look at the context that they have given us is, in this activity, the teacher has told the students to discuss their favorite festival, which means the child is getting importance here and they have to share their personal experiences, which means correlating with their life. The next one is they have to write a paragraph about it, which comes in the oral approach. Then the last option that we have is habit formation. So now we have seen how in the same context various principles of language learning and language teaching is being incorporated. Now we have to tell which are best reflected here. So the options that we have, A and B only, which is correlation with life, child-centered learning. A, B and C only, adding oral approach to it. And the third option, B and D only, child-centered learning and habit formation. And the fourth option with all the four, correlation with life, child-centered learning, oral approach and habit formation. So as we saw in our discussion, it is the A, B and C principle which is being used in the activity here. So the correct option here would be A, B and C only. That is the correct answer here. With this, we come to the end of our discussion and also this session. In today's session, we have looked into what is the language, why it is important for us to learn language, what are the various characteristics of language, how we learn language, how does language teaching occurs, what are the various principles of language teaching, what are the various maxims of language teaching, and how all of this has to be transacted in our classrooms for better learning of our children. So, with learning of all of these concepts and seeing a variety of questions that we discussed and solved together, this particular topic is important with the perspective of clearing CTET examination. This will come in both paper 1 and also in paper 2. So, we will meet for further discussion in the next session. Thank you.